Hello and welcome back to the World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we rank every politician and tell you who's winning and losing each week. This week I'm joined by Rory.
Hello.
And Zach.
Hello.
How are you both doing?
Oh, incredible.
Pretty good.
Yeah?
It's pretty spacious sofa today, actually.
It is, sorry.
Yeah.
That was not, it's not,
Oh, no, that
doesn't
was
mean
not-
anything.
I was celebrating the fact that we can sort of man spread on it. It's good.
Great vibes to start the episode. Come on. As always, we're going to be moving around the leaderboard. This is how it currently stands. And we're going to be moving 2 people up, 2 people down, and also discussing your audience suggestion. Unusually, though, we normally start with winners. Let's start with losers this week. Okay, Zach, let's start with you. Who is your loser this week?
So my loser of the week is going to be, it's very on brand. It's US President Donald Trump. I'm sorry to do it again, but I think it's hard not to. We are recording this on Wednesday. We have just heard that not only has Zoran Mamdani won the New York City mayoral election, and I think that's probably a bit of a loss for Trump insofar as Mamdani has framed himself quite explicitly as a sort of potential nemesis.
Yeah.
But I mean, Trump might think it's good for him electorally in the long term, right? He can use that to say that Democrats are all socialists or whatever. But I think it suggests that maybe that's not as politically toxic as it once was. But also, Democrats have fared, I wouldn't say well, but they fared well enough in a whole load of other regional elections. So there were elections in Virginia, New Jersey. There was a sort of retaliatory gerrymandering measure in California, Proposition 50, which also passed. Yeah, I think that is all bad news for Trump. I think the other thing there that hasn't really gone as much mentioned, obviously, is actually that Trump's own approval ratings have suddenly, and for reasons I'm not entirely sure of, started slipping, right? I think much to Liberals' frustration, his approval ratings actually held up surprisingly well, especially compared to his first term, right? Throughout, let's say from basically April onwards, really. Like, he just sort of hovered around -7, according to most aggregators. And this is despite doing some pretty eye-catching stuff, right? Like, I think if you had told Democrats that Trump would, like, you know, be deploying various federal forces in Democrat cities and threatening to invade Canada, his approval ratings would have been rock bottom. But actually, they held up really quite well for the past, whatever it is, 6 months. But in the past couple of weeks, all of a sudden, again, for reasons I'm not entirely sure, they have really started slumping. And so it depends who you ask, which poll aggregator. But, you know, YouGov, for instance, has them at -18. There was an SSRN poll that put them at -26. Nate Silver's aggregator currently has him at -13, which is about 5 points below where he was. But that's 5-point drop in, you know, a couple of weeks, right? There's another one by G. Elliott Morris has more like -18. Those are all pretty miserable numbers. And I think another thing that you dig into that data, one thing that's quite interesting about it is that some of that does seem to be driven by the fact that MAGA as a brand actually seems to be suffering somewhat, right? The number of people who identify as MAGA has dropped by about 10 points in the past couple of months, basically. At least according to pollsters who asked that question. So I think those are the two things, right? There is the sort of headline stuff about Democrats faring well enough at various elections. And then I do also think the fact that his own approval ratings are falling is probably a bit of a worry for him.
Okay, Trump moving from lightly negative to neutral. He's really slipped recently. Trump was at the top of the board for a while, also been at the bottom of the board this year. So he's shuffling around, but he's definitely on the decline. One other election you didn't mention, which I think was interesting, was, and it was such a minor election, I understand why it didn't make the list, was the vote in Georgia. It was for like their state board of, I don't even know, it's so boring. It's like energy and water or something. Anyway, really minor, but the interesting thing is it was a statewide vote, which a lot of these aren't, and the Democrats won something like 62-38, and even Steve Bannon called this out as like a particularly alarming thing for the Republicans, because sure, it's a different crowd who turn out to vote in not even a midterm, but an off year. But these are monumentally big numbers, and the Democrats have never controlled any of those positions in Georgia before.
That is interesting.
It's a major swing at a state level.
I would say that was one of the issues for Democrats at the 2024 election, though, was that they were given a lot of solace by those special elections where Democrats outperformed. And it turns out it's just because Democrats are more sort of politically engaged on average than Republicans, right? True. So they outperform special elections and then all get a bit complacent and then lose a trifecta to Republicans.
So what is it that the Democrats and Republicans should learn from this? Maybe specifically Mamdani, because we discussed this in videos too. You've mentioned, obviously, the potential for Republicans to weaponize Mamdani's kind of socialism against him, but this is something that has been tried with AOC, Ilhan Omar, kind of various other kind of Democrats in the past. And I mean, you could argue how successful it's been, but it doesn't ever seem to have really stuck. So what do you think Democrats should learn from this, and what do you think the Republican response will be?
So I do think there is a limit on how much you can learn in general terms from Mamdani's victory, right? There are so many specificities to that particular election. It's obviously a very liberal city. Mamdani ran a very, very good campaign in lots of quite idiosyncratic ways. But the thing you just mentioned, I think actually is just such a clear takeaway. It's about the fact that explicitly left-wing economic policy are just no longer, they just aren't politically toxic in the way they used to be. I think we already did see that again. Bernie Sanders is a good example of someone who polls very well nationally, despite being sort of an avowed democratic socialist. I also think one of the interesting things about this is that, you know, like Trump somehow has maintained the support of all the sort of neoliberals in the Republican Party. Oh, not all of them, you know, some of them like Rand Paul have put up a bit of a fight, but Trump is not, Trump has some very left-wing economic policies, right? I mean, obviously he promised not to scrap any of the various, you know, Medicare, Medicaid or Social Security during the campaign on multiple occasions, right? And he did try to wind them down in the Big Beautiful Bill, but that wasn't in his original format, the Big Beautiful Bill. And also he's done some like pretty, you know, capital C communist things, right? Like taking stakes in private companies. You know, that's pretty, Bernie would love that. Bernie did love taking a stake in Intel, for instance, right? And so I just think that, you know, and running massive 6-7% deficits. I think also there's a sort of like, maybe I'm taking too much here, but like there's a sort of like communist socialist vibe in his whole, like the fetishism for manufacturing jobs of old, right? You know, that is a very sort of like Soviet take. You know, you're imagining the men with the hard hats in the fields and the factories and all that. That actually is not miles away from that sort of nostalgia you see on the left for like the Green New Deal sort of thing, right? That we're going to replace the sort of like manufacturing jobs of old with these still sort of, let's just say like respectable, stable manufacturing jobs anew, which are going to be basically the same jobs but transposed into renewable industries, right? So instead of doing coal mining, you're going to be maybe cobalt mining, or you're going to be an engineer. Instead of you're on, I don't know, like a big ship, you'll be on doing a wind farm.
Turbine.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I get it. Absolutely.
So I think there's, in that sense, like that has sort of numbed that attack line from Republicans. Right? I don't think they can really say, look, we're the free market dudes. Those are those commie socialists over there.
Everyone's become a communist, is your argument?
I think, honestly, I think in America, one of the things I think is interesting in America, and I've really put this exclusively down to the fact that America can borrow as much money as it can. Americans have not had to make any sacrifices on economic policy for a very, very long time, right? You know, Trump just has his cake and eats it, and then just, you know, goes for 6%. A deficit representing 6% of GDP and just goes like, fine. You know, like, you can see such a clear disanalogy between the UK and the US at the moment, right?
France.
Yeah, well, France, exactly. So like, you know, the UK is supposed to run a smaller deficit than the US here, but because the bond markets are just saying no, we have to be like, okay, we've got to do some miserable things. We've got to, you know, raise taxes or cut spending, right? And that forces you to have a sort of like inter-party debate about how you want to perform that fiscal consolidation. Whereas in the US, because they can just run bigger and bigger deficits, apparently, you know, basically Democrats go, we're going to do tax cut, well, more big spending and maybe some tax cuts, maybe a couple of tax rises, but probably not. And then Republicans are going to go, we're going to do big tax cuts and a little bit of big spending, a little bit of extra spending. And in the end, basically, they both end up cutting taxes and spending more and just sort of getting away with it, right? Trump has made, so I think basically the fact that America can borrow loads of money has meant that the two parties haven't actually had to have it out over economic policy, and they can basically just keep not really taxing and spending quite a lot of money. And so that has allowed, they basically, then the two parties have converged on the same platform, which is we're going to keep spending and not raise taxes.
It's okay if not, but is that, Rory, do you have any thoughts on the whole kind of elections that happened last night?
I was going to say a few things about the redistricting. So in California, the Proposition 50.
Yes.
There's, I saw an interesting thing about how, I think it's in Kansas, where Republicans were considering redrawing their maps, just like a lot of other Republican-led states, but they've now sort of backed off that. And part of that is because when you redraw your boundaries to sort of spread the Republican vote out as much as you can, it means that it sort of makes it easier for you to sort of get a landslide victory in a good year, but it also risks that in a bad year you have a total wipeout. Because you're taking those sort of Republican plus 20 districts and turning them into Republican plus 5 districts so that those other Republican votes can be spread into other districts. And based on the results from yesterday, if we go into the 2026 midterms and it is a blue wave and Republicans have redrawn their districts in a way to, in theory, should give them, a chance for a landslide. If it is a blue wave, that is a real risk to them.
Yeah.
And I think you might start to see some Republicans thinking, maybe we shouldn't do
and
this.
also some representatives from those districts who are saying, well, my district is pretty okay at the moment.
I don't
want to give away all my good
race.
Republicans.
Yeah. And the other thing, so Zach said something about, why has Trump's approval rating slipped just in the last few weeks, I suppose. And the only thing I can think of is the government shutdown.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if I'm right in saying it's approaching the longest ever, but it's definitely sort of near record length. Which is pretty bad, there's lots of people not getting paid. But every government shutdown, the thing is like, who's going to take the blame for it, or who will the public blame for it? And I guess at this point, it seems like the sort of democratic messaging over it has been more effective, in that Trump doesn't want to fund, food stamps and healthcare and that kind of thing. And I guess that would be at least part of his polling slip.
And I don't want to get accused of overly reading electoral tea leaves again, but interesting, the results out of Virginia yesterday, which is a state where there's tons of federal workers, obviously neighbors DC, and specifically among federal workers and districts which disproportionately had them, you did see a swing towards kind of Democrats more than you would have expected. And obviously some of that is those people also in polling saying, well, kind of Doge has affected people I know, people have been fired, etc., and they don't like those things. But equally, you would expect if the Democrats were the ones really being blamed for it, among those federal workers who are out of work, are seeing difficulties, they would be punished too. And it does seem, primarily at least, that the Republicans bore the brunt of that.
And also, if as seems to be being mentioned now, that like air traffic control and TSA sort of workers are off the job sometime soon, that's going to have some real knock-on effects around the country.
Yeah, it's not just federal workers in a handful of states that are really affected. It is everyone. And not even just the workers. I mean, if we do see the TSA disruption that's being proposed,
people trying to go home for Thanksgiving, all of that,
people will be annoyed. If there's one place you get annoyed people, it's airports. So you don't need to wind them up anymore. Anyway, that is enough on the US for the moment. We have a whole bunch of content on that coming out on the TLDR global channels. Keep an eye out. Probably already out by the time you're watching this. So yes, go and check that out if you want more. Rory, let's jump over to you. We are definitely leaving the US with this one. Who is your loser of the week?
I just realised why he's going up. Good one.
Who?
No, this is loser.
Oh, loser. Sorry.
Sorry.
You got excited.
Got too excited. Well, that's a little teaser for later.
A baffling teaser.
I just clicked. Carl.
Yeah. So my loser of the week is Assimi Goïta. General Assimi Goïta, I think is his official title. He is the leader of Mali, and he has been since a military coup in 2021 brought him to power. His whole pitch when he took over the country was the government and military is completely failing to hold back this sort of Al-Qaeda linked insurgency in the country. Our French allies are not helping us either. The international sort of troops we have on the ground are not helping. So the military are going to take over the country. We're going to get a hold on security, kick the French out, bring the Russians in, and everything will be fine. That's proven not to be the case. Okay. Not only has the insurgency persisted, but it has got a lot worse. Previously, the Al-Qaeda sort of the group is called JNIM. It's sort of an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. So JNIM was generally based in and focused its attacks in sort of north and east, I think, of Mali. But in the last few years, they've spread further and further south, down through central Mali into the south and southwest, which is the sort of population hub and economic hub of the country. And for the last few weeks, maybe more than a month now, they have been sort of strangling the capital Bamako with this blockade of fuel, because Mali relies on a lot of fuel tankers coming in from neighboring countries along highways to the capital and out into the country. So JNIM, they've been blowing up fuel tankers, kidnapping drivers, doing everything they can to prevent these fuel tankers from making it into the country. And it's been remarkably effective. The military hasn't been able really to, they have a few successes where they sort of join a fuel convoy and help them get to the capital, but really not enough. So it's at the point now where schools and universities are suspended. You've got a massive spike in fuel prices, loads of people just queuing for fuel that basically isn't there. So yeah, it leaves the military in a really bad position. It doesn't have that the sort of justification that it had when it came to power in the first place. And I think it's massively underreported, actually, that you've got an Al-Qaeda linked group that is sort of on the verge of toppling a government in West Africa. There's a lot of debate online about, are they going to try and take over the capital? Is it going to be like the Taliban taking over Afghanistan, or even, HTS in Syria? I mean, maybe a slightly different example there, but a lot of the analysis I've seen suggests that maybe they aren't actually going to try and take over the capital and overthrow the government in that way. They're more content just sort of weakening and undermining the government that in a way that will give them more control and power over the areas they already do control. But whether they go for the capital or not, like it's a pretty devastating position for him to be in.
So that is Goita being added to the board, a new addition. The rules dictate that if you're added to the board, you can only be added to the lightly positive or lightly negative section. Obviously, as a loser this week, Goita is being added to the lightly negative section. You obviously mentioned at the beginning that a lot of this is kind of predicated by the French military being removed from the country and kind of Russia being brought in. So this kind of has a fairly major kind of international dynamic beyond just the domestic and kind of obviously kind of horrendous situation in the country itself. So what response have we seen from the international community more broadly? Have Russia or France or anyone else particularly intervened or said anything?
There hasn't really been anything like that. Like, you don't have the French saying, look, bring us back and we'll help you out. I think they're definitely
quite bold.
They're sort of keeping their distance. I think Russia's been fairly quiet about it. One of the most interesting sort of international interventions, I think, is that JNIM kidnapped or sort of abducted these two Emirati businessmen, I think, who are working in the country, and they managed to get them released after paying JNIM some huge amount of money. I think it was into the tens of millions of dollars, and agreed to send over some kind of shipment of ammunition. And it got there for two Emirati businessmen.
To the terrorists?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, which...
The UAE have got some fingers in some dodgy pies.
I know, right? Yeah, so now that just says to JNIM, like, oh, if you want a good source of income and ammunition, start kidnapping people and ransoming them.
That's crazy.
It is crazy.
Should we send Ben on a little trip?
How's that going to help us?
Yeah, I realise he's going to bankrupt us. I don't know for a second.
And just
what I meant is we should start kidnapping people.
Yeah.
I don't think the answer is yes to either of those questions.
Yeah, no, terrible. I don't know what was going on.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think it suggests that a lot of governments, including the Malian government, probably think that realistically negotiation is going to have to be a part of this. Military response isn't going to be enough. But yeah, I mean, with the French out, the UN peacekeeping force out, the EU are out, there's still a small Russian contingent there. But I think countries like the UAE and Turkey, which are trying to expand their sort of military influence, will be looking at that region and thinking, I'm sure we can do something here. Because obviously it's not just Mali, it's Niger and Burkina Faso. And I did actually think about moving down Ibrahim Traore, because I know he's survived the purge last episode. And to be fair, he could move down sort of adjacent to this because he doesn't control like a third of his country. But yeah, it's I think as a region, it's a really, really dangerous position. And
it's one we've been paying attention to for a while
spots.
now, and doesn't seem to be getting any better.
It's also, I mean, I'm not defending the sort of like general French policy here, but I think it is worth mentioning that, for all the sort of like talk about getting the French out, the French were, I mean, internationally renowned for how capable their military was in Mali and Burkina Faso. Right? The DOD and I think the RAND Corporation both paid for studies basically on like how French forces performed in Mali. I think it was Mali specifically. I think it was an operation around Bamako a couple of years ago that basically was just so successful with such a small contingent that the rest of the world was like, oh, we need to start paying attention.
Sad news.
Well, so it's amazing how much of a name Ibrahim Traore has made for himself. Do you know what I mean? A little bit. Like I've forgotten the whole spate of coups.
Yeah.
And the other guys have just sort of fallen off. And Ibrahim Traore is, I mean, household name is too far.
Online personality.
He's a bit of a...
And he's managed to build that reputation despite really not having a hold on things on the ground.
I had a mate of mine who went to maybe more, I can't remember, one of those African countries, and he was Kenya. He went to Kenya, and he was talking to people there, and they were all constantly talking about Ibrahim Traore.
Really?
As a sort of like.
I think you say he hung out with Ibrahim Traore.
No.
Just bumped into him in a bar.
Yeah, and then he got kidnapped, and someone had to pay for it. But yeah,
Anyway, let's move on to our mini game this week.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, we announced that we had made these, the World Leader Leaderboard, World Leader Magnets. This allows you... That's not a great name. I like it. These magnets feature the faces of a whole bunch of the world leaders that we rank regularly on the podcast. So we thought we'd turn them into magnets and allow you to rank them at home if you're frustrated with our questionable sometimes rankings. As part of introducing these, we have also launched this fun mini game as part of the show, whereby the team get to rank world leaders using a different to normal metric and using physical magnets, which is more fun. So, Zach, do you want to pull one of the cards and then don't look at it, hand it to me?
Oh, does he need to choose his people first? Or does
Oh, yeah, fine.
Oh, okay.
But you can,
Should I do people first?
No, you can pull it.
Okay.
No. Okay, you need to pick 5 people, please. Here are your options.
Okay. Can I have Starmer,
Yeah.
Putin, MBS? I think I have to have Trump. He's just such a
Putin.
character.
Yeah, fine.
Or who's the last one? Should we go? Let's go for Erdogan.
Erdogan.
Big names.
Here is your mini leaderboard featuring some lovely arrow magnets. Today, your ranking it's an opinion one. It is not a, we're yet to have any
It's not a
fact
serious
ones.
one,
It's
is
not
it?
a serious one, I'm afraid. It is based on the likelihood that you think you could convince them to ride a roller coaster with you.
Well, I think
Who do you think's most game for a roller coaster?
Trump would be so game for a roller.
Do
He's
you?
actually a bit old, but like
He's a bit old, and I also get the vibe that he's like, I imagine he's scared of flying.
okay, Putin is going bottom. There is absolutely zero chance I'm convincing Putin to do it.
Why?
Because he's just he doesn't do that sort of thing. You know what I mean? He's quite he's
got
a
an
curated
image.
image.
Yes,
You know,
yeah.
he's not going to let that slip.
Okay,
Also, like you can't really tell him to do things. Do you know what I mean?
sure.
Starmer, I reckon you could sort of bamboozle him. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Do anything.
I think you could just sort of like he'd sort of mumble, be like, "Oh no, oh no, no," but then you sort of just put him in the chair,
Yeah.
get the seatbelt on, and
Yeah,
then just
he's
go.
Yeah.
To be honest, that's put him top. I reckon
Imagine
I
if,
could just
The
sort of
most manipulative.
carry him into
Okay,
it.
fine.
If we had Ed Davey as an option, he'd be top of the board
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
true.
Space. MBS is young, likes video games. I reckon he could be into it.
Also, the Middle East is investing in theme parks like crazy at the moment.
Oh,
There's
that's
so
true.
many
I
theme
probably
parks
should
in
switch. I'm going to switch him quickly.
I don't know if he likes them, but
I
they're
reckon
big on tourism.
I think he'd be into it. But he also has an image, so I don't know if you get the
He
cameras out.
does.
Um,
That's fine. No one said it had to be publicised. I mean, maybe the photo, the on-ride photo is tweeted.
If you pay for it.
Yeah, you could have
the
paid
idea
£15 for a magnet.
of Erdogan on a roller coaster
Yeah.
is really making me laugh. I can imagine his expression just not changing throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
Just
I think he's quite he's
austere.
kind of like
He doesn't
frail
really-
as well. I think he looks quite like
Yeah,
tall and
I
thin.
know what you
I don't
mean.
know.
I think it's a tough
difficult.
one. I do think Trump is slightly more
Yeah.
likely, right? Like he did Theo Von.
I think
You
a
could see him
younger
on
Trump would
you could
be
see him on a
down
roller
for it.
coaster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's
Okay,
pretty
so run us through your list.
reasonable.
Your top of the board is MBS.
MBS, so I reckon secretly just does like it.
Yeah.
He probably is having fun. He's only like what, 35?
He's pretty young. Yeah.
Starmer just because you can sort of
Trick him.
mumble him on.
Yeah.
Trump just because I think that if you did Theo Von, like I think if someone told him it was a good media strategy, he probably would do it. Erdogan, I do think that's a risk. I think it'd be quite tough. Tough to get him on. God, I can't believe I'm having fun with this. This is so lame. And then Putin, just because there's no way the KGB would let that happen.
No, that's
right?
fair.
100% not going to happen.
Okay, let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with Zach's rating of roller coaster rideability. And if you want to rank the world leaders on this metric or any other, then make sure to pick up a set of the World Leader Leaderboard magnets. There are 2 packs. There's the starter set, which includes the arrows and 10 world leaders. And then there's the European expansion, which adds a bunch of European leaders. If you buy both right now, you can get 25% off using code LEADERS. So pick up both packs, the base game and the expansion, and use code LEADERS at checkout for 25% off. Okay, fun is over. Let's move to the audience suggestion. Okay, so every week we choose someone on the board who we discuss and then move based on your suggestions in the comments of the previous video. This week, your suggestion was Lee Jae-myung, the president of South Korea. Currently at the top of the board, could be about to move. Rory, do you think Lee Jae-myung is a winner or a loser this week?
I think he's a winner this week. He just keeps on hitting that top level.
Yeah.
So for a few reasons, he's had a bit of a diplomatic flurry in the last few weeks because there's just been a lot of like sort of diplomatic events in Asia. But it meant he met with Trump, with Xi, and with Sanai Takaichi, and he had pretty good meetings with all three of them. He came away from the Trump meeting, where, by the way, gave Trump this replica golden crown like 2 days after the No Kings protest, which was quite amusing. But anyway, so he came away from the Trump meeting with a deal to reduce tariffs, the automobile tariffs in particular, which is a big one for South Korea, and also most notably permission from the US to go ahead and build nuclear-powered submarines, which is something that South Korea has wanted for a while, that the US has generally had a policy not to allow that. So that's sort of like, with the AUKUS deal, that's what it's allowing Australia to do. It allows South Korea to join that quite small club of countries. And then just more broadly, his approval rating continues to be pretty strong, pretty positive. And I think that is impressive. I think we've said it before, but he came into office not because he was a popular politician, but also because his predecessor had such a catastrophic demise. And it would be quite easy for someone like that, Lee Jae-myung, to come in off the back of that, but not remain popular. But he has done, and I think that is a sign of sort of political savviness from him.
Sounds like it. Zach?
Yeah, no, I'm sold on that. Rory is our resident South Korea expert, so I'm just going to let him take the lead.
Were you our South Korea expert before we went South Korea, or did that pique your interest?
I think that piqued my interest, but then it was like 2 days after was the martial law thing, which was kind of crazy. So
sad we missed it.
Yeah.
We could have been martial lord. Anyway, Lee Jae-myung.
Sounds like a person.
Yeah, it does.
It does. Lee Jae-myung is moving up on the board as our winner, but unfortunately, he's already at the top. As such, he will not move up again. He will just get a +1 next to his name and join quite a large and growing club of people with positive numbers next to their name. There's a lot of people at the top
need to take some of them down a bit.
Maybe we do.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a plan for that soon.
Do we?
Maybe.
I don't know about it.
We do. But anyway, he is moving up and is a winner this week.
I'll go and turn that on.
Oh. Okay, so now we're moving on to our winners of the week. We've done one winner in the audience suggestion, but we got two more. And let's start with you, Zach. Who are you moving up this week?
So I'm going to move up Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. There's nothing that she's done in the recent, past week or so that's triggered this. It's actually the Dutch election that sort of inspired this thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, pretty crazy. We're pretty fun on this podcast. But the reason is that at the Dutch election, obviously, the headline story is that Liberal D66 party came out on top. And conversely, Geert Wilders is, normally described as far right, and it is pretty right wing. The PVV party underperformed, basically. And this sort of gave way to this thought that, I think in quite a lot of cases, quote unquote far right or sort of populist right or hard right parties in Europe do actually struggle to govern, right? Obviously, this is to some extent true with the PVV, although they were also in coalition, which made it a bit more difficult. But I think you've seen it in the UK with Reform, right? They've got into positions of power in loads of councils, and they're already struggling, admitting they can't doge all the councils, various sort of there's scandals involving 19-year-olds being given massive budgets or whatever it is, and sort of infighting within the party. You saw it in Finland. People don't really talk about this, but the Finns party went into government and very quickly became very, very unpopular. You saw it to a lesser extent, I think, in Portugal, where Chega underperformed the polls in the most local elections. In Hungary, where Orban isn't far right, really. It's not really a good label for him, but he has that sort of I hate the word, but people say populist, right? He sort of fits somewhat into that mold.
Yeah.
He's also dipping in the polls. I think maybe the best example actually is in Spain, right? Which I think people don't really talk about enough, which is Vox. And people look at the national polls and they think, Vox has never done that well. And they sort of infer from that there's some sort of Spanish exception. The Spaniards are uniquely liberal. But I think that's maybe true. But there's also this sort of other story about how, because Spain is very, very devolved, the regions have lots of political power, Vox did basically enter government in a whole load of those regional assemblies. And then very, very quickly people were like, okay, so you're not actually that good at governing. And that meant that they never could maintain the momentum to get purchased at the national level, right? And I think Meloni is the one really obvious outlier in this respect, right?
Yeah.
Meloni is the one sort of politician who came to power, who's generally described by the international press as far right, or what used to be, who came to power and has since basically remained really quite popular. The Fratelli d'Italia are still top of the polls, basically. And her own approval ratings are still pretty good, especially when you think back by European standards, right? Every other European leader basically is suffering from miserable poll ratings. Merz, Macron, Starmer. Meloni is by far and away the most popular of those leaders. And that it's not like she's been given a particularly lovely inheritance either, right? She has pursued a really quite austere project of fiscal consolidation. Italy is now running, I'm pretty sure, primary surplus, although it has run some primary surpluses, in the 2010s. And that's why, famously, Italian debt now basically is more in demand than French debt for the first time in really very, very long time. And so I think that's just it's just pretty incredible, right? I think that the fact that she came to power as a sort of populist attacking the establishment, and yet has remained very, very popular, despite the fact that she's also had to push through some pretty steep, basically, spending cuts. So I think that's the reason Meloni's going up to me. I think that she bucks that trend, right? That populists can often win power, but do generally struggle to govern in Europe. And Meloni has bucked that trend, and also the more general trend of European leaders being very, very unpopular. Do you see what I mean? Do you not think that in that light, it's pretty crazy? It's also worth noting that in the Italian context, she's like the first explicitly political, non-technocratic prime minister they've had for ages. I think loads of people thought that she was inevitably going to fail and have to give way to another Mario Draghi. And the fact that she's sort of bucked all of these trends, right? She's bucked the trend of the populists struggling to govern, of European leaders, at least big European leaders, falling in popularity, and the trend of Italian prime ministers, basically having to give way to technocrats. I think that is really quite an achievement.
And as such, she's moving up from lightly positive to fully positive, shuffling up the board there. Rory, what do you make of this argument around kind of European right and European far right struggling, and kind of Meloni's position within all of that?
It's a very interesting one. It's a good one. Because when you said you were going to move up Meloni, I didn't really know why, and then you mentioned the Dutch election, and I thought, it's a fun way into it. But with that Dutch example, you've got the PVV sort of fell in their result, but the sort of wider right wing vote, I don't think fell that much, because you had another right wing party, JA21, I think, that sort of had a bit of a surge, and that's something that Meloni has managed to avoid, that being outflanked or another right wing force coming up and trying to usurp her. She has, while keeping those right wing parties in her coalition, she has managed to sort of keep a check on them and remain the dominant right wing force, which is pretty impressive. I don't really have much more to add than that. It's a good argument.
We know that Nigel Farage is a subscriber to TLDR UK and TLDR EU. Not sure if he regularly watches World Leaderboard.
Yeah, he is.
But if he does, what tips can he learn from Meloni as a kind of more populist, further right leader, potentially looking to enter government for the first time? What's his checklist of tips he should take from Meloni, if any?
I think probably the lessons from you might call it the Meloni experience is that the sort of electorally optimal strategy for those sorts of parties is to campaign on quite a right-wing platform, and then moderate in at least some places when you actually get into government. And I think that, to be honest, I think Farage probably would do something quite similar to that. I also think that Farage is, like Meloni, more conscious of what the sort of centre-right, British centre-right thinks than other sort of right-wing populists who are quite ideological and often unwilling to sort of widen their appeal, right? I think that Farage's in broad terms, his electoral strategy is always involved, really capturing the further right element of the electorate and then sort of expanding that outwards, right? And to that end, he's always done stuff like distance himself from Tommy Robinson, for instance, and I think you see him talking less about Trump now than he used to, right? He used to always be talking about how he was our man in Washington or whatever it was. And even to some extent, some of his economic policies, he's sort of tried to moderate some of his economic policies, move them sort of more in a sort of Tory direction recently. And so I actually think that, and look, I think the difference here, right, is that Geert Wilders actually has been around for a very, very long time. I think he's been MP for since like the 80s, but lots of those other right-wing upstarts are just relatively new. Farage has been around for decades, right? Yeah. And like he's a very savvy political operator at this point. And I think if he were to win, for what it's worth, I imagine he would probably fare relatively well for at least a bit like Maloney has, right? I think he would probably avoid some of the pitfalls that have beset other relatively new political upstarts in Europe. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's actually quite a lot of similarities between Farage and Maloney in that respect.
Interesting. Well, if we're still doing this show in 2029 and he does win power, we'll have to keep an eye on him on the board. How will he move? Rory, let's close with you. Who is your winner this week?
My winner this week is the Moroccan Prime Minister, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Aziz Akhanouche, who has been Prime Minister of Morocco since 2021, but has only really been in the headlines in the last few weeks for two reasons. And the main reason, and this is why I'm moving him up, is because the UN Security Council recently backed Morocco's autonomy plan for Western Sahara.
This is what I clocked.
That's what. There you go. There's the teaser. So it's. I don't want to get too deep into the history of the conflict, but it's a 50-year conflict. Morocco annexed Western Sahara after Spain left, and they fought a war with the Polisario Front, which is the sort of local people there, obviously not wanting to be annexed by Morocco. Polisario Front was backed by Algeria, but for decades now, Morocco has controlled most of Western Sahara, apart from a little strip along the sort of eastern edge. So Morocco, in the last few years, has had a real diplomatic success in bringing a lot of important countries around to supporting their vision, which is autonomy for Western Sahara, but under Moroccan sovereignty, which the Polisario Front doesn't support, by the way. So you had France in particular was a big player that moved to support this plan. The UK has done recently, other EU countries as well. And the US put forward this resolution that described the Moroccan plan as, I think, the most feasible solution to the conflict. And it was passed by the Security Council at the end of October with 11 votes in favour and none against, because you had China, Russia and Pakistan abstaining. So it's a big diplomatic win for Morocco. And you had a lot of countries, including the UK, that for years always didn't really take a position and just said, it's something that we need to sort out as an international community. Back in the 90s, when a ceasefire was agreed, there was the promise of a referendum for the people in Western Sahara as to what they want, either independence or Moroccan sovereignty, but that's never come about. And this UN resolution hadn't made no mention of a referendum, so it sort of seems like the cause, sort of Western Saharan cause, has really hit a roadblock. It's hard to see how it comes back from that, given that the international community has seemingly moved behind Morocco. But for Akhanouche in particular, this is a big win for him, because in the last few weeks and months, there have been these big Gen Z protests in Morocco demanding his resignation.
He looks about 12 though.
He does, yeah. So that was a pretty precarious position for him, but he's come through that, and now he can celebrate this big Moroccan win. And they've already declared October 31st, which is the date of the Security Council vote, as a new national holiday, which is sort of, classic move. So he's my winner.
Okay, another new addition, another slightly rogue Rory addition to the board. And being added to the lightly positive.
No, I think the fact that has sort of like gone under the radar, because that's actually a pretty definitive pivot from the international community on an issue that has been unresolved for like a very, very long time. It just sort of quietly happened.
Yeah, how did that happen? What was the shift that happened there?
I think there were sort of two sides. One is the US sort of pushing ahead with this, and the other is the abstentions from the other sort of permanent members. But I think what it suggests is just that after 50 years, it's an unresolved conflict. Morocco has had de facto sovereignty over most of Western Sahara for decades now. There's loads of Moroccan settlers there. They've built ports, they've built roads, they've sort of developed a lot of the area. And it's just the fact that even if you're a leader of a country that sort of feels moral support and empathy with the Sahrawi people, which are the people in Western Sahara, the facts on the ground make it very hard to sort of back them. They really don't have much leverage. And I think it's a sort of sad fact that is what has probably driven a lot of the international community, and that's why they describe the Moroccan thing as the most feasible solution. It's an endorsement of it by saying, sort of, we're just trying to be realistic about this. So I think that's probably what's driven it to this point.
Trump will probably claim it as another peace deal.
Yeah, he probably will.
Good point, actually. I mean, based on something otherwise, one of the less tenuous ones to be that.
I think one other thing I'd add in is that I think that some of this is to do with the fact that France and Algeria have had somewhat of a falling out, right? And you might have once imagined France to maybe exercise a veto in the Security Council for that sort of thing. But there has been a very big diplomatic fallout between France and Algeria recently that has sort of like spiraled out into a wide dispute about colonialism and French attitudes towards Algeria in the past.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think that probably also didn't help.
Yeah, absolutely.
From Algeria's perspective.
Okay, so we've got 2 new people on the board, 3 moves. It's now time to decide who our ultimate winner and ultimate loser of the week are. Okay, so the way this works is we will now each get to vote for an ultimate winner and an ultimate loser of the week based on the discussions we've just had. And if we have unanimity, that person then moves an additional spot up or down on the board. Let's start with ultimate loser because we started with losers this week. Your options are Trump or Goita. Rory, who did you vote for as your ultimate loser this week?
I have gone for Assimi Goita. I'm very sort of compelled by the Trump arguments, but I think the scale of sort of catastrophe in Mali makes him the ultimate loser. And it's plausible that he might not be around for much longer on the board if the military get a bit sort of twitchy and think, we need to get rid of him. So I'll move him down while I still can.
True. Zach?
But I did really like the Goita. This can be very, very polite, but ultimately offensively stubborn from both of us. But I did buy that. But I think that the Trump has had this particular week has been particularly acute for him. Right, I think that Mali has been a long-running fiasco since the French withdrew.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to the same point of this week in particular. The fact that we have all of the elections that didn't really go his way, and then also his general approval rating slipping. It's kind of a double hit there for him. But very fair. And you're right. He might not even be on the board for that long. Ultimate winner. Can we reach a consensus here? Your options are Maloney, Akanouche, and Lee Jae-myung. Okay, Rory, who did you vote for?
I've gone for my own suggestion again. I've gone for Aziz Akanouche. I think, it's just a really big moment and it's sort of his win, I suppose. So I think more so than Maloney, the last week has been very big for Morocco. And Lee Jae-myung, I could think of him as a big winner this week, but I can't just keep bumping him off the top of the board. So,
Zach?
It's obviously not your vibe, but it's so pick me to be like 2 very obscure people and then be like,
enforce it.
Yeah, they're actually the best.
Well, let's see.
Gosh, I hate this podcast. But I'm going to agree though. It's definitely Akanouche. That's massive.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised we haven't done a video on it.
We maybe should.
Maybe we should. Might be a bit late to it now, but
if we didn't know it happened. I also went for Akanouche.
Yes.
So we do have movement there. He is moving up an additional spot. So he's added the board today in lightly positive and it's already being moved to the positive section.
Just very quickly on that, if we noticed it, we might as well do it. Someone on the recent TLDR Global video, it was, how China's quietly internationalizing the yuan. And someone commented, well, it can't be that quiet if TLDR News Global knows about it. Which actually did just get me. It made me feel so small.
Very good. Okay, that is all for today. So join us again next week for more winners and more losers. And of course, let us know in the comments who you think we should either add to the board or move on the board in the audience suggestion section. And whoever gets the most likes within reason will be the person that we discuss in next week's episode. We'll see you then.